Having started taking photographs at school, Jeremy Walker studied at art college before going on to work as a photographer's assistant in London. A stint at a commercial studio in the Midlands followed before he went freelance. Around this time, he also started shooting landscapes for the stock library market. Before long, landscape photography took over. Nowadays, he supplies images to design agencies and publishers and runs workshops on behalf of Lee Filters and the Nikon School, as well as providing private tuition both in the UK and overseas. I met with him to discuss 3 of his images. Hi Jeremy,
Hi,
nice to see you and get the chance to talk about some of your pictures today. And I understand with this first one we've got a bit of a story about the benefits of moving away from the crowds.
Yep, it's shot on a very famous beach in Iceland, and when I first visited in 2003, you could have the place to yourself. Now there are just a lot of photographers, a lot of tourists, but they all go within about 100 yards of the car park. So walk half a mile down the beach and you can get something a bit different. You don't get the big, huge icebergs, but it's quite nice going and looking for, the smaller detailed shots. It makes you think about what you've got to shoot,
Yes.
And you go looking for the shot rather than the shot just presenting itself in front of you. The iceberg itself is probably the size of a basketball, or double the size of a rugby ball. So it's not huge, but I just love the light coming through. I love the texture in the ice. I love the shadow with the little patch of detail here. And then I think the sand itself, the black volcanic sand, with the light just glinting and twinkling off of the sand, I just think made the shot. I love these it's a colour image, but with a monochromatic feel to it.
Yeah. And so how low is the sun in a picture like this?
The sun it's about an hour after sunrise, but it's winter, so it's still very low on the horizon.
Yeah.
You've lost all the warmth from the sunrise and everything, and it was almost a case of, do I shoot it, don't I shoot it? But in the end, looking at it, the light was actually perfect, even though it wasn't sort of the warm sunrise I thought I was going to shoot. So you've got to be flexible.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to look for other things.
Yeah.
A lot of people will go out and think, I'm going to shoot a sunrise, and if they don't get a sunrise, they pack up and they go home. When you're somewhere remote, you've got to come back with a shot, really. You've got to make it work.
Yes.
You've got to use your eyes, you've got to use your legs and get out and walk and look and go and find the image.
And sometimes, like you say, look for the smaller things rather than the big grand.
I'd almost call this a micro landscape rather than the big grand view. A lot of people will stick a wide angle lens on and they'll look for the big view. This was shot on the Nikon 45mm tilt shift. It's one of those occasions where the smaller image, the smaller view has certainly worked.
And in the background we've got what actually looks like pure sky, but actually isn't, is it?
It's the sea, and the exposure is several minutes. I've used the Lee Super Stopper on this. There's also a soft edge grad to control the exposure of the white water, but it's several minutes of exposure. And during the exposure, of course, I'm praying that the waves aren't going to come in too far and lift the ice and move it and ruin the whole shot.
Yes.
And I've just got away with it. The highest wave came within about 12 inches of the ice. But I love the way the water has blurred. To have the water pin sharp, I think would have detracted from the textures and things going on in the ice. It's the simplicity that I think pulls the eye in and makes the shot.
Yeah. This next picture is part of a book project, I believe.
Yeah, it's a long-term publishing project I've been working on involving ruins and castles and things like that. This is actually Keith Castle in Scotland. It's almost as far north as you can go in Scotland. If you want a castle to yourself, it's a good one to go and shoot. You will see nobody. I love the access to it is great because Scotland has this right to roam, so you can walk across the fields to get there. And I love its position in the bay. I love the fact it's part of the cliffs.
Yeah. You can certainly see why it was built.
Yeah.
Where it is.
Yeah. You can see the purpose of it. But it's a great location. It is a very remote location. But if you are in that part of Scotland, it's a great castle to shoot.
Yeah. But on this day, obviously, conditions might have been considered against you slightly.
Yeah, it's one of those grey Scottish days, and you get a lot of them, certainly when I'm up there. You go to these remote locations, you want to come back with a shot, you want to make the most of it, and that's where the Lee filters will help. I've used the big stopper again to get motion in the water.
Yeah.
I was very lucky, the clouds were actually going straight away from me.
Yeah.
So on a long exposure they form this sort of V, which I think takes your eye into the shot. And then with a lot of landscapes, I'm shooting with a 0.6 hard edge grad over the sky, just to help with the mood and balance with the foreground.
Yeah, and I suppose that's one of the advantages of the stopper filters, is they do allow you to get a picture on a day that otherwise you might just be heading home or to the pub.
Yeah, a lot of people will look at a grey day and think, oh, I can't shoot, I want a pretty sunrise, I want a pretty sunset. But I actually think the stopper filters, grey overcast days with low contrast, I think those filters really, really work.
That's
at their
when
best
they come into their own.
on those days. So don't just give up because it's grey. I'd say embrace the grey,
Yes.
and especially in Scotland. I had seen this castle photographed by another photographer, and I thought, well, that looks like it's a great location, but I didn't particularly like the shot, but I liked the location.
Yeah.
So I probably spent a day and a half, maybe 2 days researching it and then having a look round. And then came up with this, and I was very lucky because I think the rocks here pointing in from the corner, and when with the headland pointing in that way, it balances. If the tide had been further out, I think these rocks in the right would have dominated too much.
Yeah.
If the tide had been further in, they would have been covered and you wouldn't have them. So I was quite lucky to be sort of around when the tide was right. I've also spent about an hour on the beach cleaning away all the seaweed. So the foreground here is clean. I like my images to be clean and neat and tidy.
Yeah.
So I've removed all the seaweed.
And it just shows, I think, the value of, you know, really doing that last check around the frame. And if there's something that bothers you, like, you know, a bit of too much detail in the foreground.
The sea, it was messy. It was just messy, and there was a few sort of, you know, Coke cans and things like that lying around, and so but spending a bit of time, I've got no problem with that.
Yeah.
There are some people who say, well, that's not what was there. You should photograph what's there. But I think in terms of producing a picture that I want, removing things like the seaweed and rubbish and plastic bags, I think is fair enough.
Absolutely.
They shouldn't be there anyway, the plastic bags.
No.
So
and the picture is about the castle, and that's what you want attention to be.
It's the castle, and it's
to.
the mood, it's the drama, and it's the location that the castle is in. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. This last picture, I think, shows the value of photographing a well-photographed subject, doesn't it?
It's a lot of people will say, oh, I'm not going to shoot that, it's been shot before. Well, I think, to be honest, most things have been shot before.
Yeah.
But I think the key is, if you haven't shot it before, go and shoot it.
Yeah.
Forget what other people have done, go and shoot it. This is Brighton Pier, and it was very wet and stormy and very grey. And I just sort of looked at it and thought, well, the clouds are beginning to break, it stopped raining, the tide is right in, which has accentuated the uprights here. Got the kit out and went and shot it.
Yeah.
The water was barely moving, the clouds were barely moving, so I knew I had to have a long exposure to make it interesting. So I've used the super stopper, the 15 stop filter, and I've actually shot for 9 minutes.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of hoping the tripod hasn't sunk in the pebbles and things like that.
Because there is a danger of that happening without you realising, isn't there?
Absolutely, and then you get double images and you've got to start all over again.
Yeah.
And it's just given me a hint of blur and movement in the sky, and obviously it's blurred the sea around the old pier. There's also a grad. Even though things are sticking up into above the horizon, there's a 0.6 hard edge grad running across the horizon just to control the exposure of the sky.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter that things are sticking up into it, because once things are silhouetted and they're black, you can't make them any blacker.
Exactly.
So the grad will work quite well.
Hence you haven't got the line going through the
There is
middle
no line because they're very dark anyway. And also it's a colour image, believe it or not.
Right.
There's a hint of rust coming through here, but again it's a very sort of monochromatic colour image, which I think adds to the feel.
Yeah.
And I quite like that sort of look.
Yeah. So would you have desaturated it a little more in post-production, or is this pretty much as it's?
I have desaturated a hint.
Yeah.
I've also actually softened the shadows just for the effect around the pier there. It's a technique I quite like to use. A lot of people, again, will oversaturate images. They like colour and they think images must be sort of bursting with colour. I've tended to go the other way recently, and I quite like colour images that have got a hint of colour, which this has, and I think as a technique it works well.
And it certainly suits a subject like this one.
It lends itself to this sort of subject. If it was a garden full of sunflowers, you probably wouldn't want to desaturate it, but a grey day when there's very little colour to start with, it's a technique that works well.
Yeah.
And so using the super stopper has just accentuated, say, the water, the sky, and it's just helped create a mood and an atmosphere to it. I mean, it's shot as a single frame. A lot of my panoramics are shot 3 images stitched, but you can't really stitch 3 9-minute exposures together because obviously the clouds will not match up. So in this instance, I've cropped, but because the camera's got such a huge pixel count, you can throw away some of the pixels and you've still got superb quality.
Yeah. So is it cropped mainly from the bottom?
No, it's cropped actually mainly from the top.
Okay.
This is actually pretty much the bottom of the frame.
Yeah.
And when I set it up, I had a lot of sky in it because I wanted the blur of the clouds. And when I actually looked at the shot, I thought, I don't actually need the cloud. The most blur and movement is actually down on the horizon. It's down here. So I've just got rid of some of the top of the image rather than the bottom of the image.
Yeah.
It is probably one of my favourite images of the last sort of 6 months to a year or so. Yeah. It's the sort of thing I'm into at the moment. It's minimal colour, it's neat, it's clean, it's tidy.
Yeah.
And again, it's another one for the book project.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for your time, Jeremy. It's
Pleasure.
been really good to talk to you, and always nice to learn a bit more about your pictures.
Absolute pleasure, and it's actually quite nice to see some prints from work. Normally you look at the computer screen, you send things off to clients, and you never see it printed. So to do some big prints and talk about them, absolutely great.